Occasionally, you may have the need to assign a task to run on a specific server rather than the one you've been targeting in the rest of your playbook. This is called a delegate because we're delegating a task to a specific server. Use cases for delegate include disabling monitoring alerts on one server, removing a server from a load balancer pool, templating out a file to another host than the one you're running the playbook on, or really anything that requires you to delegate a task on a specific server. For our purposes, a common task would be a restart task, followed by another task that waits for that service to come back. So if I open up my test delegate playbook here, already got it started. So I'm going to start with the restart task, restart machine. I'm going to use a shell command to sleep for 2 seconds. And then I want to issue a shutdown command with the -R for reboot and make sure that that happens now. And I'm just going to put in here a quote about why we're restarting the computer. And then I'm going to add a couple parameters. So I've got async 1, pull 0, and ignore errors set to true. The async and the pull settings means that we're allowing the task to continue on in the background so that we can move on to our next task. And the pull number of 0 means that we're essentially firing and forgetting this task since we don't care how long it takes to complete. We just want the reboot to happen. We're also setting ignore errors to true because we don't want the task to fail if there are things that still need to close out on the target host before the reboot kicks off. So our next task is our waiting task, waiting for server to come back. And for that, we're going to use the wait for module. So host equals inventory host name. So that variable that utilizes the host name as it's listed in inventory. We're setting the state to started because we want the machine to be started. We're going to set a delay equals 30 and a timeout of 300. And basically, what those mean is that we're going to wait for 30 seconds before we start the timeout, which is set to 300. So the timeout of the task to overall timeout, which would be 5 minutes. And then I'm going to set become to no because I'm going to delegate this task to localhost. And so we don't need to escalate to the root user on our local machine. Before we move on, why are we delegating this task in the first place? Remember that we're rebooting the machine in our first task. So we're going to lose the connection to that host, and we want a way to keep the playbook going, hence our delegate wait for task on local. So basically, while the machine is going through its reboot procedure, we're just waiting for it to come back, and then we can kind of move on again as necessary. Now, we can actually shorthand this task by using something called a local action. And so I'll just write this out and we'll comment it out later. But if I wanted to shorten this, I could do local action, wait for host equals inventory host name, state equals started, delay equals 30, timeout equals 300. And then I would still set become to no. This is just shorthand syntax for a delegate on a local host. We're going to keep the delegate theme going here. So I'm going to delete this guy because we're not going to use it. We're just going to use the delegate. But just know that if you are delegating to localhost, then you can use local action instead. And so that's kind of how the two can be used synonymously, but I don't necessarily have to delegate to localhost. I can delegate to anybody. So that's just an example. I'll go ahead and delete this guy. And before we move on, I did want to just show you one other feature that's new as of 2.0. This is something called delegate facts. I'm going to make a new play called testing delegate facts. And I'm going to set the host to test server again and remote user, EC2 user. Yes. Get my task section going here. I'm going to gather local facts and I'm going to use the setup module for that. Delegate locally. Again, I can use local action there if I want to. And delegate facts true. And what delegate facts true does is it basically allows me to actually gather the facts about the machine that I'm delegating to, because by default, even on delegated tasks, facts gathered there will be assigned to the original host and not the one that we're delegating to. To get around that, we're setting delegate facts to true so that we can gather facts from the delegated host instead. So this is all we're going to need for our playbook here. And I did want to mention before we run this that wait for task will probably take upwards of 5 minutes. So through the magic of editing, it's going to appear to be much shorter, but I didn't want to have you sit here for 5 minutes watching a blank screen waiting for the task to finish. Just keep that in mind when you're watching it. It does usually take about 5 minutes, hence the timeout setting. So I'll save this and then I'll do Ansible playbook I hosts test delegate. And then we'll go ahead and run this. So we're starting off gathering facts on our target machine. We're going to do the restart, which should come back as okay because it's just a shell task. And now we're going to wait for. So at this point, I'm just going to be quiet and we'll wait for the task to complete. After that very long delay, we can take a look at the task completion. And as you can see here, it's showing that the original task has been delegated to localhost. Then the same thing with our next play, the testing delegate facts. It's starting off by gathering facts on the target machine, but then we're gathering local facts and delegating those locally. And you can actually jazz up your playbook even further by adding a register to the end of your delegate facts and then debugging the output so you can see the facts gathered locally.